off your back. You see it there in an hour or less. How do we do it? This is not like ordering pizza or something where it's an hour or less or your next audit's free. It doesn't work that way. But we all know that in the concept of auditing, it tends to be kind of painful, especially with there's a lot of information that you're having to kind of drudge through, a lot of different kinds of questions that you're supposed to have answers for, and a lot of disparate information that you're trying to somehow put together in order to provide those answers and even provide some context to hopefully turn what I would call a sort of information into intelligence and intelligence into insight, if you will. And it's not that easy to do. Even today, even 17 years into having Active Directory around, auditing is still not exactly the easiest thing to do. And so the place where I really want to start is just kind of talking about why isn't it a 1 hour exercise? Why isn't it that you can't go ahead and just find the answers just like, I just snapped my fingers, you probably couldn't hear that, but just like that, you have the answer. It doesn't work that way. And you already know in a lot of cases that you're going to be audited. Many of you have either annual audits, semi-annual audits, maybe you have compliance audits, maybe you're worried about security audits. We'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions in a slide or two to kind of get a sense of where you're at. But you already know that those kind of things are largely going to happen. And Microsoft has certainly put down some foundational tools and methodologies through a tremendous amount of auditing data and some basic tool sets. I'm going to talk about some of those today and kind of lay some groundwork for you of what you can do. But even with those tools, of course, the responses that you try to come up with take, and I put here hours or days or maybe even, weeks, if you will, depending on what it is you're trying to find out. And the question becomes, what is really the problem here? Why is it that it does take hours and days and things like that? And part of it could just be the fact that there isn't enough detail. In many cases, though, if we're centric just on Active Directory, there's probably enough detail there. Some things don't always have enough auditing detail. For example, if we're talking about, let's say, group policies, we know that a group policy object was modified, and we'll see that in the event logs. However, you're not going to see exactly which policy in a group policy was changed. So you don't sometimes have all the detail that you might need. And by the way, that's actually important even from like a security standpoint. Some of you might be thinking about, let's say, group policies from just a standpoint of like, I don't know, remove run from the start menu kinds of stuff. Just things that are very more about experience and user environment type of settings. But you could do things like, let's say in the default domain controllers policy, if I was to go ahead and assign someone any of a number of different kinds of local privileges that allow them to log on locally, that let them act as the operating system, they could end up compromising Active Directory. So having that detail down to that minutia, those very specific things, is actually very important. In some cases, it's a lack of the information that you need, and that kind of goes along that same line. Maybe there's some additional piece of information that you do need, and I'll give you some examples here about what an audit might look like. And we've all kind of been through this a little bit here together, but I'll give you some specific examples where maybe the lack of information might exist. And then, of course, sort of a lack of tools. And well, you've got the folks at BeyondTrust. I know that Rod from BeyondTrust is going to show you a little bit and talk about their solution here at the end of the webcast today. Some of you are still trying to figure out, that's great, I know that I'm going to get a pitch, but what can I do on my own? And that's why I'm here. I'm here to try to talk about what can you do on your own, but recognize that there are going to be limitations because Microsoft is not in the business of Active Directory auditing. They provided you the foundational data sets and tools by which to do that auditing, but that's not the business they're in. So remember that. Now, another aspect here that I want to kind of talk about why it's not a 1 hour exercise is in the last, almost like the last year or so ago, and I know that seems like a very short time in IT terms, but there's been a lot more focus on security. And the challenge with security audits is there are a lot of places that you should be looking if you're going to worry about your Active Directory security. So if you're doing an audit of security, not so much you're being audited where someone's coming in and they're trying to say, all right, so who's been in the domain admins group the entire year? That's one of the examples I'm going to walk through in a slide or two. That kind of stuff. But instead it's more about what changes have been made. And you're looking at very specific ways that someone can get some sort of elevated privileges in your environment. There are a lot of places to look. And I did a webcast on this for BeyondTrust. I don't know, it was Sarah, was it a month ago, 2 months ago? When did we do this? Just so the folks in the call know when to go look on the website for it. How long ago was that, do you think? 2 months ago? That sound about right?
Yeah, it was last quarter.
Last quarter, all right. So I talked about all the ways that attackers would possibly leverage Active Directory and the way that you can audit some of those aspects of Active Directory to see if it's being touched, modified, accessed, etc. And I just grabbed a quick list here from that slide deck to kind of give you an idea of things like you'd be looking at, let's say, password resets. You might be looking at who's modifying group memberships, particularly to groups that provide access, privileged access to something. It could be Active Directory, it could be a resource, could be an application, whatever it is, set of servers. Could be looking at just modifying permissions. There's a lot of ways to actually gain elevated permissions in Active Directory by, for example, giving someone inheritable full control rights to the root object in the domain, things like that. Even modifying the schema. There's some specific parts of the schema that, when modified, can give someone elevated permissions to any object that's created after the schema is modified. And even back to my example about modifying the GPOs and or links to GPOs, the thought process there being, if you think about my example earlier about modifying a group policy that modifies or sort of impacts a domain controller, where you're talking about those log on locally rights and those elevated privileges on a domain controller. If I have rights to either modify that GPO or the rights to the domain controller's OU, and I could link another GPO to it and give it preference, I could end up doing the same thing with just by creating my own GPO. So there's lots of things you have to worry about as well, and all this adds in together to kind of go back up to that top question again, why isn't it a 1-hour exercise? There's lots of stuff that you have to be watching for, and that becomes part of the problem. So I've got a couple of steps here that sort of make this simpler. Part of this is in execution, where I'm going to use just some simple examples of like Event Viewer, and you can use your own tools, you can homegrown, you can PowerShell, but more so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to elevate your thinking about how you're going to approach this problem, and not so much do I want you to walk away saying, Nick told me the exact way to do it, because that's not what I'm trying to do today. I am giving you an example of how you can do it for free using native tools, but I'm more so trying to focus on how do you elevate your thinking about how you're going to approach the problem. So the first step here is just to think like an auditor themselves. What is it that they're going to be asking? So you of course recognize that the auditor doesn't just want you to enable auditing, because really what they're thinking about is they're thinking about coming in and asking you a number of questions. And that's how you should be thinking about this. The auditor is coming in seeking to get answers about specific either scenarios, specific aspects of your environment within Active Directory as it's reflected in Active Directory. They have some specific kinds of questions. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. It's things like, who's in the domain admins group? That's a question that's got to get answered. And you want to be thinking about what questions are going to be asked by the auditor to the best ability that you can. Someone might say, I literally have no idea, Nick. Okay, I get it. And this step might not be all that helpful for you, but if you can, the other steps that I'm going to cover here on this presentation today are going to kind of lay on top of this as a foundation. So try to follow with me, try to see if you can think a little bit like it. I've got a couple suggestions here, things like maybe there's compliance mandates. So if you've got, if you've got HIPAA, GLBA, you've got any of the FISMA and NIST types of standards, you've got PCI, the list goes on and on. Even if you've got, person identifiable information, you got GDPR over in the European Union, things like that. Any kind of compliance mandates, there are specifics there in terms of, it might be vague, like establish and maintain levels of security, but there's still something that you have to do. And you can at least think about if someone's coming in to do, let's say, a compliance audit, they're at least going to be asking questions around those mandates. So think along those lines. Think about your own security policies. The audit might be revolving around whether or not those policies are enforced. So if the policies are things like nobody should be added to the domain admins group without being notified and logged in some system somewhere. I'm making this up as I go along. How could you prove that if someone said, prove to me that actually happened exactly that way and that the policy was maintained and that kind of thing. So you think along those lines. And then you even think about it as part of a larger security initiative. Sarah put up the question around privileged account management. There might be some larger security initiatives that you're doing, like privileged account management or identity and access management or something like that, where there are very specific groups that need to be protected, and maybe it's going to be questions around those types of groups or those kinds of privileges, as the case might be. And so the idea here, I'm actually going to skip past, I think, this question here just because of the way that GoToMeeting's been working today. So I'm going to move past it, but I really wanted to kind of get a sense of what your audits are focusing on. But if you have a chance, just stick something in the Q&A box real quick. What are your audits focusing on? And I'm going to try and see if I can incorporate some of that into the into my presentation today. So you just, whatever it is that you're focused on, it could just be general security, it could be related to compliance, it could be that you're really concerned about external attacks or insider threats, or whatever the case is. Put that into the Q&A box if you can, just so we can kind of see that. And if I have a chance here, I'm going to try and read some of those, and that helps me tailor the rest of the conversation here today. So the second step here you can see is to be proactive. If you're thinking about what it is that that the auditor is going to ask you. So Kevin just popped in and said he's doing auditing for lateral movement. I'm assuming you mean an external attacker coming in. They've already gained access. Now they're trying to laterally move within the organization. So he's got to think about things like what groups provide privileged access within Active Directory. Basically, it's that second slide that I showed you that kind of covered 5 or 6 areas of Active Directory of how attackers might want to leverage Active Directory. He's probably worried about those kinds of things. Michael says he's interested in NIST. Patrick says that he's worried about automated or reoccurring privileged access, and group attestation wants to make sure that someone's actually double checking that the groups are or have the right group members and probably have the right privileges as well. So we want to be proactive. You guys have a sense of what it is that your goal is and what questions are kind of going to be asked, so you be proactive. And the idea here is if you only have native tools, and I'm giving you one example using just Event Viewer as an example here, is you'd want to try, and if I go back over here, click here, you want to try to set up the answers now. And what I mean by that is you think about, I'm going to show you 2 things. I'm going to show you Event Viewer filters and a little bit of XML. Real basic stuff. I'm just going to give you the scratching the surface to kind of give you an idea of what you can do. But the idea is if you know the questions that you're going to be asked, not all of them, we know that, but some of them, right? And like Navasha says here, or Nyasha, excuse me, says compliance primarily. So they were going to be worried about, let's say, PCI compliance for the sake of argument. And they didn't say that, but I'm just making an example. You can go back and look at the things that PCI is looking to have established as far as levels of security that have to be implemented, and what kinds of things do you have to prove. And so you set up those answers now. Now, the way that I would do that, I'm just going to share a quick example here with an Event Viewer filter. And I have an example that I made called 80 changes to domain admins. So one of the examples I love, and this is a real example that happened to a client of mine, where the auditor came in and then asked, they basically walked in and they said, that's the only thing they said, but they said, I'd like to know anyone who's ever been a member of the domain admins group anytime in the last 12 months. Go. Now think about that, how hard that is to answer. Within an hour, that's pretty tough. But if I have an ability to know proactively all the changes made to domain admins and I already have a filter set up for it, then it's pretty quick. You can see where I'm going, how we do this in an hour or less. If I know that I have to do that, I got new groups that are created, or changes to enterprise admins, and you can do this over and over again, multiple ones that you have, and these are just different views that you can see. That way you can at least answer the question as quickly as possible. But the challenge becomes that once you're asked that question and they say, who's been in the domain admins group for the entire year, and you answer it, and you say, well, these 7 people, and they've been there the entire time, and then this one guy, but he was only in for 3 days. You know what your next question is going to be? Show me everything that person did everywhere for those 3 days. Go. And that's even tougher. So, and that's where you start thinking about thinking like an auditor. And that's what I mean by thinking like an auditor, is to come up with some of the answers that they're going to, some of the questions they're going to ask, and try to build those. So I have this changes to domain admin. And you could start with the basic filter, the filter tab, which I don't have shown here on the screen. I'm showing the XML tab. But that would get you with something like where you could put at least the event ID of 4728, which is changes to a group. Group membership. But then I would go over to XML, and you can do any of a number of searches on the web for how to modify XML content, and there's a lot of great examples. And this is here, you can see kind of it's about the 4th line down. It says event data, and then @name equals target username, and data equals domain admins. That's the way in XML filtering I would actually specify that the object that I'm concerned about being modified is the domain admins group. So now what I've built is a quick filter that says it's the domain admins group, and it's the event ID that says that membership has changed in Active Directory, and I have that set up as a custom view within Event Viewer. So, and then once I do that, then if I look at the results, and here I'm showing you one result, but you can see if you kind of look in the the detail box here towards the very bottom of it, you see the group name is domain admins. And it looks like there was a guy named Toby West, and Toby West was the guy that made, the subject was B Pels, they're the one that logged in. Toby West, I think, was the object that got modified, and then the group was domain admins. So now I have at least a filter where I can answer the question really quickly. So kind of keep that in mind. So the first thing here is use those event viewer filters and use some XML code. And then the idea here is you're going to have to look through the answers that we're going to require some more digging. Back to my example of, okay, great, what are all the things that, he did those 3 days he was in the domain admins group kind of question. You got to think about that. And you want to look at it from a standpoint of there might be multiple ways to accomplish a given task. If you just think of, for example, just an ADUC alone, if I want to add someone to a group, I can just, right-click, add member to group, and I can do it that way, or I can go into the properties of the group and go over to the group membership tab, things like that, right? And there might even be some external tools that could be used as well, where it's not just inside ADUC, and you've got to kind of think of any kind of answer that might require some more digging, and how would I find those answers together. So think about that creatively a little bit. You may have to think about correlating multiple events, and that's the beautiful part about the filters, because you can put Boolean logic in there and have OR statements and that kind of thing. So you can have multiple event IDs and multiple criteria, and put that together to have multiple events together to get more of a comprehensive answer. And then this one kind of goes outside the context of this particular webinar, but you could have actions that go across multiple systems. It might just not be Active Directory, particularly in the case of like, what did Bob do those 3 days he was a domain admin? It's not just an Active Directory, but it certainly starts with Active Directory. We think back to some of the interest here, like I mentioned, Kevin's mentioned about lateral movement within an organization. There are things that an attacker will do. For example, they will try to create multiple accounts, so they have multiple ways of getting back into the organization in case passwords get changed, because one of their goals is persistence. They want to be able to stay persistently in your network, and those groups might be added to privileged groups, and that they have access to certain applications or data, or even Active Directory or parts of Active Directory, that kind of thing. It just sort of depends there. And then the other thing here is, the third step here is to kind of know your limitations here. For some of you, you may not even know XML. So I've got a quick link here. You can go to this bit.ly link, and you can go, and it's a great kind of primer on some of the XML as pertains to Event Viewer. So that might be something to look at. I'll leave that up on the screen for the next minute or 2 or 3 while I'm talking about this slide. But for some of you, that the limitations might be not just, I don't know XML, so I got to learn about it, but it might be also you understand the limitations of Event Viewer itself and go, that's not enough. So you might want to even move to something more like PowerShell, because you can do a lot more advanced parsing. There's a couple of really good PowerShell commandlets you got here, get win event and even get event log, and you can start, if you're good at doing some scripting, you could end up building a bit more of advanced parsing, put some logic in there, and then have a resultant set that is far more concise than, for example, all that Event Viewer is going to give you, which is simply a bunch of events that you're going to then have to go through one by one still and review the data inside of them. So PowerShell is probably a little bit of a better solution if you have the ability to do the coding, because it's going to be able to allow you to customize, in my mind, with the part that's important, which is the output, right? We want the output to be actionable. Much like the auditors saying who was in the group, they're looking for the response to that, and they want that response to be actionable. Well, Bob, he was only in 3 days. The action is they can say, great, now tell me what he did. And that's why I love that example, because it's really about what an audit is all about itself. Now, the other thing with the limitations here is sometimes correlation of data isn't enough. It's not enough just to say, I've got the 3 different event IDs and I've got a couple of filter criteria in there to make sure that I have just the event IDs that I need. That's correlation of data. But when you're really looking at more of analysis, and it's things like, if you want to have conditionals, and I'll give you an example. Let's say you're worried about if someone changed a group membership in Active Directory, but they only did it on a day when they happened to log in before business hours. I mean, really weird scenario. Like they came in early, and that's the idea. They're doing something sneaky, so they came in early, and then they did the change where they hope no one would notice, kind of a thing. Sure, you could just look at the change and look at maybe the time, but there are some conditionals there. But if you've got more conditionals around, if they did, let's say, this thing in Active Directory and this other thing in Active Directory, then let me know about it. That's where you at least got to either have PowerShell, or if you're looking at disparate logs, same thing. And the reality is when you're looking at really more doing analysis and not just correlation, you're really trying to figure out, is there relationships between a lot of disparate data and a lot of conditionals, then really what you're looking at is you're probably going to need a third-party system. And the reason why I say that is not just to go, and now over to Rod. Go ahead and do the demo, Rod. That's not the point. The point is you got to know your limitations, because in some cases, yeah, we can do it ourselves. We absolutely can. Some of you, honestly, the needs that you have, you can meet it on your own. But some of you, an hour or less, it's just not going to happen because of what you truly need to be able to answer. And so you've got to know your limitations and figure out what answers can you provide in an hour or less by doing some of this proactive work, and what can't you do in an hour or less, if you will. So if you're going to try and get this down to 1 hour or less, or your next audit's free, like I said at the beginning, the answer is it's going to have to be something where you deal with this proactively. You still have to do the work, but you're trying to do the work once, and you do it now while you're not being pressed for time. And so you have to think about, again, go proactively think about what's going to be asked of you as best you possibly can. You're going to either try to get the answers, or as I put up here, the minimal effort here is to at least get and know that you have the data that will provide the answers. That's probably closer to what you're going to actually get. But keep in mind that the answers, if you get fairly good at some of the XML filtering, even though what you're going to get is a resultant set of events, that is the answer. If you can get it down to when someone's been added or removed to a group, you can start going through and figure out every time someone's added to a group, you've got the answer of any time someone was added to a group. You have the answer, but you are going to have to do a little bit of work. And I think I mentioned custom views way too many times, so I'll skip that line there. And then again, if you're going to get down to hour or less, you got to think about when the native tools are enough and when they're not. Some of you, Event Viewer, perfect. Some of you got to go to PowerShell and start doing some more advanced parsing. Some of you, third-party solutions. So kind of keep that in mind. Now, I appreciate the fact that some of you guys are piped in with some of those commentary on what you're trying to focus on. Alan mentioned increased focus on vendor and contract relationships, so he's trying to worry about whether they have access. So he's worried about, let's say, maybe filtering down to specific users or users that are members of a group. If you're going to try to do that, Event Viewer is not going to do it based on if the user is a member of a group. That's where you start getting into PowerShell, because you'll start getting a result instead of users, and then you start parsing the different events to figure out if those users were involved. So that's going to probably be more of a PowerShell thing. Lauren says their desktop OCR audit was heavily focused on risk analysis and management. So in this case, if you're looking at desktops and figuring out who's logging on, if they were compromised, those kind of things, there's a lot of great data and auditing that's inside of the stuff from Windows 7 on. Microsoft put a ton of new auditing data in there around process utilization, which processes actually launched which other processes, when people have logged on, when they've actually used additional credentials, things like that. So it's outside Active Directory, but that kind of data is there as well. That's probably something where it feels to me like a solution and not even using PowerShell, because you're going to have to take a lot of that data together. And then Randall's mentioning insider threats. That goes back to one of my initial, and Randall, you definitely want to go watch the other webcast. I show some of I think these same screenshots a little bit here and there, but I cover a lot more of the very specific things you want to look at. And then some of you are just looking at audits of the system being used and what's going on in general. And I think especially when it comes to that, because like Doug mentioned, that is what we've talked about today is probably pretty perfect for that. Even if you're just using Event Viewer, if you know what the things are that the questions you're trying to answer, ask the question. Ask the question in form of an XML filter. Ask the question in the form of building a PowerShell script, but you can do it. It's got to be done proactively. So with that, I think my time is up. It looks like there's a couple questions coming in, and we'll try to see if we can answer those at the end of the webinar. But for right now, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Rod from Beyond Trust. And so with that, Rod, take it away.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me okay?
We do.
All right, awesome. Let me just get my monitor shared out here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys a quick run through of a couple things. First, I'll start with some slides. So as much as I know that everybody's excited to see a computer screen ready to go, but I'm going to start with some slides to show you guys, and then from there we'll jump into showing the product. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our auditor suite, and specifically I'm going to focus on change auditing for Active Directory because that was the topic that Nick was covering for us today. And again, we'll answer both Nick's questions and my questions at the end of the webinar. So what Auditor does is it does real-time auditing. Again, we're going to focus on Active Directory, but it does it for Active Directory Exchange, SQL, Windows file system, as well as for NetApp. The goal is, rather than having your audit events distributed across all your domain controllers within your enterprise, for some customers they might be talking about 2, just for fault tolerance. Other customers, likely the larger enterprise customers, might be talking about dozens, if not hundreds, of domain controllers across a very distributed geographic location, getting all the audit data from all of them, bringing it back down to a central location so you can view that, and you can view it either via Win32 app or you can view it right from the web. It's just making it easy for you to gain access to your audit data that happens. And then there's a continuous backup thing that actually happens there as well, so that when you make changes, you can actually roll back those changes. It's a very simple architecture. From a general standpoint, the administrators will just come in. They'll deploy the auditor agents on the infrastructure. The auditor agents actually talk to a SQL database to send all of their audit data up there. From a regular user coming in and trying to look at the audit data, maybe the auditors who are trying to see what's going on, they just hit the interface. The interface talks to the SQL database and pulls back your audit data, so you can either do rollback, restore, whatever you need to do, but it's all in a simple interface. So like I said, I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on slides. What I'm going to do now is jump us over, and we'll focus on a little bit of a demo here as to what I'm talking about with Auditor. What I wanted to do is try to keep everything I was going to talk to you guys about kind of focused on what Nick was covering today. So one example he was talking about was being able to audit group membership changes. So what I'll do is I'll actually, rather than adding some directly to the domain admins group, I'll take this group here, and then I'll look at its members, and I'll add somebody there. I think I have a group called PCI. There we go. So what I did is I just added a group to a group that's inside of domain admins. Now, what I also know, because I set this up right before the call, or right before the webinar, was I also went in and I created a group called PCI admins. This is the one you saw me add, and if we look at the member of, the members, this guy is a member of the MD PCI admins, and if I go take a peek at this audit review group, this audit review group is in the PCI admins, and we know that the MD PCI admins was in domain admin. So I kind of have several layers of nesting. So really what I want to do is I want to just go ahead and manipulate this group now. So I'll just grab a user, let's just modify the members. And I'll take this user and add him to the domain admins group really quick to make my life easy. Now, from an audit standpoint, obviously, as Nick was kind of pointing out before, is someone's going to come in and say, who is added to the domain admins group? Go and try to figure out who did it. What I did is I'm lazy. I'm not as good as Nick, so I set my stuff up ahead of time as well. So I have audit views that show me all changes, and I really wanted to focus on built-in groups. So I'll quickly let you see what the audit view looks like. And on the where the change occurred, I have all the different various built-in groups that you have in here that you might be concerned with. And again, you can filter this down to just domain admins, just schema admins, just enterprise admins, or you can have it for all those groups. So I want to know only when these objects changes, and I'm only focused on the group membership. But again, I could just look at everything. So if you change the description, I'll know about it. Now, when I run that audit view, again, I have it going back over a length of time. But what I want to see are the changes that happen. So I can see the modification right there to the domain admins group, and voila. So I can see when John Perkins was added to the domain admins group, I can see the changes that actually happened to those various groups over time. If I wanted to do that nested and recursively all the way throughout, I can absolutely do that. And what I'm going to show you is a different view so you can see it done that way as well. So those were direct adds, but the problem I might be dealing with is that you have a secretly nested add that's actually going on here. So rather than using something that I predefined, I'll use one of my built-in views, and I'll just go look at all changes of the last 24 hours, and we should get a slightly different view of that. So what you'll notice is we do see that John Perkins being added to the domain admins group, but again, what we're looking for is, well, how did he get in there? And again, that's through product of nesting. He was in the audit reviewers group, he was in the PCI admins group, he was in the MD PC admins group and you see all the layers of nesting. You can also see the member of for John Perkins being changed, and you can see all the various audit data that come in here. So I don't really just need to look at domain admins, but I need to look at everything that's kind of related to domain admins, and this kind of helps you get a view saying it's not just domain admins, but it's everything that's inside of that and all the different various groups that are nested out. So someone could have a group that you don't really look at, and then they add them to there, which in another group, another group, another group, and then you get the impact statement of a user getting added to domain admin. So this is a very good way to see that nested or impactful of your changes that you're actually making within your infrastructure. So that's one example that Nick was actually sort of covering off for you guys. Now, of course, it is important to audit all your critical change you had. So we also talked about auditing group policy changes. So one is settings. So if someone's manipulating settings, we'd like to know about that. So I was in the midst of manipulating a GPO setting. I'll just go ahead and do that now here. So I modified a setting. I just created a restricted group in a particular policy, and then I think the policy was, pre-production policy. So I just made one really quick change, and that flowed through. So now what I want to be able to do is come back and say, well, why don't you show me all GPO setting changes that have happened across your enterprise? Because if, for example, on your desktops, all of a sudden, magically, people aren't members of the group that need to be a member of the local administrative group on your end users' workstations, you want to know what happened. Likely it was pushed out through GPO. So I can go take a quick peek and look at all the GPO changes. Several of the key problems we want to try to solve for you. You can see all the pre-production policy changes that happened, but more importantly, you can see that I set up a group policy setting for the administrators group, member of, made sure that exactly my user was going to be a member of that group. But more importantly, we show you, if you're not really familiar with policy, so you're saying, hey, I have the data, but how to go research this. One, I know the policy name right there. It's a friendly name of the policy. But more importantly, I know the path to the policy settings. So I know it's under computer configuration, policies, Windows settings, security settings, restricted groups. It's not hard for me to figure that out, because if I jump back over to here, we'll see it's computer configuration, policies, Windows settings, security settings, restricted groups, and there's a setting. So if I need to just remove that, I can just come in here and delete that, and again, that exact activity will be audited that I went in and deleted that. So you can see I have my modification there, and if I just do a quick refresh, should have flowed through by now. If it hasn't, I'll go back and show that, but it'll flow the audit data right back through that I made a modification to the policy. Now, behind the scenes, all of the policy settings are actually being audited. So if I needed to roll back a group policy, sorry, I didn't mean to say audited. We're backing up all your group policy settings so you can recover. The same principles would apply with linking policies. So if you went into let's get the GPMC there. If I went and found one of my OUs, I'll use Alaska, for example, and if I want to just add a link of a policy, sorry, let me make that a little bit larger there. So if I need to link a policy to this particular OU within the environment, I'll just come over here and I'll link an existing GPO. So I'll use my pre-production GPO right there. Once I link that policy within the environment, that's kind of an important event that actually happened, because that might modify the membership of that particular group if I didn't delete the setting out of the policy. And if I want to know about that, again, I wanted this particular filter to be only for GPO settings. But if I come back over, I actually have one for the GP link attribute. And if I want to go take a peek and say, show me all the times the GPO has been linked or unlinked, you can quickly see there's Alaska right there. And you can see that a link was added to the pre-production of the pre-production security policy. And you can see the OU, exactly the path of the OU that it was linked to. So if you need to remove that link, you can just jump in and quickly remove and modify or make your changes sort of flow back to where you want. Now there's hundreds of different ways that you can come in and sort of configure these things. Now one way is to view what's going on. So I want to come into the product and I want to be able to just jump in here. If someone's modifying the admin SD holder, this is something that happened on the last webinar we talked about, as to a user manipulating the security of the admin SD holder, so someone gets the ability to modify people who are in your domain administrators group. If someone's manipulating that, you want to know about it. Well, this is kind of like one of those things saying, look, just audit this for me and let me know when these change. If someone's manipulating my guest account, I want to know about that. If I have a lot of bad password attempts on my guest account or my my KDC service account, I'd like to know about that. So if we jump in here and look, and I specifically made sure this was going to look pretty good for you guys, but you can quickly see that, man, I'm noticing that I'm at like 60 bad password attempts on this. So it kind of makes me think, excuse me, what's going on? Is someone actually trying to hack my environment right now? Excuse me, wow. But it just makes it a little easier for you to kind of dig down and figure out what's going on. And if someone's manipulating with your guest account, So, a user might be coming in and I see like, wait a second, why do I have 668 bad password attempts on my guest account? So this is something that like I want to talk to the security team and I say, we need to investigate what's going on here. People are hammering away and trying to log on as this account. Now, in my environment, likely I should, if I'm a good security person, that guest account was renamed, but of course I didn't do the best on renaming it, but people have guessed the name, guest X, and more importantly, the account's disabled. So I'm not too concerned with someone breaking in, but I know I have someone banging at the door trying to get in. So this is something that I should be raising to the security team, say, hey, you guys want to look at this? And on the backside, I said, you know what, just to be safe, I want to have an audit thing that says, hey, if this account ever becomes enabled, since I know I have people knocking at the door trying to get in, I want to get alerted on that. So I can build alerts to notify me on any type of behavior I want. So if I were creating a brand new alert, the most important thing is the action. I want to say, you know what, I want you to prevent the change from occurring. Maybe don't let you modify the domain admins group, or maybe I'd like to send an alert. I want to enable smart filtering. So I only want to know if a change happens multiple times over a very short period of time. So maybe it's not bad that the guest account has had that many failed logins unless it were clustered over a period of time. So maybe I want to say, look, if this happens to the guest account 5 times over the course of 3 minutes, now I know someone's really banging at the door trying to get in, and that's when we should be taking action. So I can trigger something to go from that point, that said point in time. So it just makes it really easy for you to configure a smart way to alert versus saying one time over 80 days is probably not something I'm concerned with, or over 5 days I'm not concerned with, but that continuous just hammering away trying to get into that account, I'm a little alarmed by that, and it's something I want to keep my eye on and look at. So the goal with the Auditor product is just to put at your fingertips all the audit data that comes from all your various domain controllers within your environment, and then just giving you a single view. So, as we were talking about before, schema changes. If someone goes in and tries to manipulate or change something within your schema and you want to know about it, again, for me it was very simple. This morning, I wanted to make sure that when a user got deleted in my environment, that I retained the password on logical deletion. So these are the 5 search flags that I actually modified with an Active Directory to ensure that would be preserved on the tombstone object. So those are all the setting changes. I know I made those, but that's something I actually want to monitor. Now, my administrators in my environment, they all have a specific account name, and they're all vaulted. So we actually took their accounts, we vaulted them in a password safe. Now, what I do is I sort of watch and I say, look, the only thing that ever changes those administrator accounts is a service account in the back end. So I want to see all password changes to my privileged account. So if anything kind of pops up where the user's changing their password, maybe that's alarming to me. So all these ones with ADM in them, those are all my admin accounts. So if I go grab this and take a peek at it, I say, yeah, that's fine. It's being done by this service account. So what I'm really more concerned with is if I look in here and I see a password change actually happening by something other than the service account. If something is other than this particular service account that's manipulating one of these admin accounts, that's when I have a problem. That's when I want to take a look at it. But I'm pretty good. I think it looks pretty clean. I have this service and I can see, yep, it's modified by the right account, so I don't really worry about it. I know that the password vault is doing its job of constantly scrambling these highly critical accounts or the dedicated admin accounts for the administrators who log into the vault to gain their credentials for the course of a workday they need them, and then they just know that once they're done, they're scrambled the next night, and they're scrambled every single day until they need to go back in and get it. So it made it very easy for me to protect their particular accounts. So that kind of gives you a general idea as to what Auditor provides. It's i.e. the real goal is real-time auditing of your Active Directory environment. If I have Chrome on here, if not, I think I have IE. Let me grab a browser really quick. And you can also gain access to all your audit data. So I apologize, I can't talk and type at the same time. So there we go. Oops. Forgot one thing. Sorry. PBMS. There we go. And voila. Did I get that right? Oh, HTTPS. Sorry. I only allow secure connections to my environment. But if you want to get access to the same audit logs, you can actually go in there. And you could log in through the web interface with inside of this, and I think I might have to go grab my password out of my Chrome browser window because I use secure passwords only. So let's just do a no there, copy that password, and let's just paste that in here. I cannot remember to type it, and if I try to type that password right now, I'd mess it up anyway. So again, all the audit activity that I have that's going on is actually all stored in here. So from a web browser, I can gain access to the exact same audit data. I can build the same filters and alerts on the who, the what, the where, the when. It's just a very good nomenclature for you to try to identify and find audit data. And then I can also do all the alerting. So if you need reports on anything that's happening within your enterprise, it makes it very simple and easy and crisp for you to come out and find the type of audit data you need. Because insider threat is a huge thing that we're all dealing with, and we need to know what's going on in our environment. And if we start trying to think a little bit more like the hackers and look at what they might be looking at in our environment, it makes it easier for us to find what's going on. So with that being said, Sarah, I'm gonna turn this back over to you.
Thanks, Rod.
Do
great
the Q&A
demo. Yeah, thank you so much. So we're going to jump into our last poll, and we had a bunch of questions come in, so we'll jump into those. But let me launch this last poll here. You should see that up on your screen, and we are interested in engaging with you guys further, and maybe even just chatting about PowerBroker Auditor or any of our PAM solutions or any of our vulnerability management solutions. So if you would like to chat or take a more thorough one-on-one demo with one of our security specialists, please select yes, and they will be in contact with you to schedule that demo. So let's go ahead and jump. I'm going to leave this up for a couple of moments, and let's go ahead and jump right in. Rob, this came in for you. So does it show you were, does it show you where they are trying to log on with the guest account from?
Yeah, so if they're on a workstation within your environment, and in this particular environment I don't have it set up, yeah, it does grab the log on from location, yes. So, and
Rod,
I can, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, finish your
I was going to say I can pop back over there. So when you do get one of those failed logon attempts that's actually happening, you can see in this case the workstation ID is right there.
1 second. Let me go ahead and close. So if you want to be contacted by a Beyond Trust specialist, please select yes now, because I'm going to close this poll so Rod can go back and show you that. Yeah, 1 second. Okay, I'm closing the poll now. Okay, that should pop up. Okay, now we see your screen. Go ahead, Rod, and walk us through that.
Yeah, I just highlighted, I grabbed one of the, actually this was one of the password changes, but you can see the workstation ID on that. And if I were to do that for bad password attempts, the workstation ID actually shows up there as well.
Thanks, Rod. Did you say the agents were only on AD boxes or on all systems in the environment?
So in this case, with Auditor for Active Directory, the agents go on your domain controllers. If you're using the other modules such as SQL, they would go on the SQL boxes for the database you want to audit. If it were on file system or NetApp, it would be on the respective systems you want to audit.
Nick, question for you. How important is security governance in establishing what needs to be audited, monitored?
Let's read that one more time. It's a lot of words.
How important is security governance in establishing what needs to be audited or monitored?
That's a good question, actually. I would say, oh boy, I would say it's going to play a pretty significant role if you're trying to establish what should be monitored in the first place. That's really what we're talking about at the end of the day. When you talk about auditing, you're really talking about what do you want to monitor and be aware of when something gets modified. So, oh boy, I'm not even sure how I should answer that other than going very important, because I don't want to just say that. That sounds stupid. Tell you what, can you provide some more context around what you're thinking, and maybe give me a scenario at your place, and that way I can answer a little better other than going, it's really important, because that doesn't really help. So if you wouldn't mind, that would be helpful to me. But another question maybe perhaps, Sarah?
Yeah, Nick, should I really be going the event viewer route? Seems a bit rudimentary. Isn't PowerShell a better option?
Okay, so that's a good question as well. Like I said, I'm trying to provide options for everybody at their level. I do agree. Event viewer is rather rudimentary, but then at the same time, rudimentary actually is sort of a negatively connotated word as well. But I think in essence, some of you in the audience, that's all you need. You might, for your security initiatives, based on your policies, your security governance plan, whatever it is that you have in place, it might be that you're just really worried about, like someone mentioned, they're worried more about group attestation than anything. They want to know who's been added to groups in general. They want to know if permissions have been assigned to that group, and they want to know, if groups have been created or if groups have been deleted, things like that. Then they want to be able to attest to it periodically. so it depends. Like something like that you could do for the most part, with the exception of the permissions being assigned to a group, because that's actually not done in Active Directory. But you certainly can at least do something along those lines with just the basic tool. So I agree. If you're trying to look at disparate environments, like let's say you're going to try and pull in permission changes to a file system for the sake of argument, to identify when a group has been given rights to that file system as part of that attestation process, just using that as the example along the way here. Then something like PowerShell, if you're still in DIY mode, the PowerShell would be a better choice, because you could at least pull that data from disparate logs, disparate systems, put that all together, and then try to come up with a correlated answer. So I hope that answers your question.
Hey Rod, is the licensing based on the number of users on Active Directory, or is it a different model? And second question, how quick is it to customize reports?
Okay. All right. So I'll start with the licensing model. I never talk licensing model. I always leave it to sales. But it's licensed based upon users in AD, but it's based upon heartbeat users. So to make it very simple, most admins have 2, if not more, accounts. They're licensed once. It's the heartbeat of the person, not the number of accounts, which is kind of very different from what other vendors do. How hard is it to create reports was the second part of the question. It's pretty simple. You're doing it based on who, what, where. Who made the change, if you're interested in that. If you're not, don't fill it out. What change actually occurred, if you're interested in that, fill it out. Usually you are. Where it occurred, like, so if you're only looking at like groups within an OU, for example, or specific objects, you need to populate that data. And then when it occurred, 99% of the time, it's really, since you're running one of these searches, you might be only interested where it occurred over the last week, because you might only run that search over the week, so you just put in your time frame and then away you go. And if you needed to take these and publish them, next month we actually come out with a release where you take your audit views, publish into SRS, and then you can have your audit report delivery, or from the audit view you can just click a box and say send me a report, a PDF report every day at 9 a.m. and when you roll in at 9 a.m. every day or on Monday of every week, you'll have your report sitting in your email.
Okay, last question that we have for Nick. I'm interested in compliance, and I'm supposed to keep us PCI compliant. What are your thoughts here?
Good question. Actually, one of the nice things about PCI specifically is of all of the compliance standards written, and unfortunately I've read them all. I actually have. I sat down one year and tried to read almost every single one of them to get a sense of how vague they are and how specific they are. PCI, interestingly enough, is probably one of the more specific standards, where you've got some very certain things that have to be maintained. So I think the answer is going to lie in going back to the latest. Are we on 3.0, I think, if I remember correctly, version 3.0 of PCI, going back and reading through those. And even though they're as specific as they can be compared to any other compliance standard, there's still a bit of interpretation. So I don't want to be the one here that says you need to go and look at these 7 things. I can certainly make a recommendation, but I think the bigger thing here is to go and look at the standards, and then those people that wrote the standards are pretty smart people, and they know that you're going to make some level of interpretation, and so they were written with a certain amount of generality to it, but you're going to figure out in your specific environment how does that apply. So I think the answer, honestly, is not just look for, hey, someone give me like the 10 things I'm supposed to look for in PCI. You can go Google that kind of stuff on the web, and it is there, but I think the better choice, whether it's for PCI or for those of you that aren't even worried about PCI but you're worried about some other compliance standard, is actually go through and read the compliance and any kind of data security standard aspects of it, and then determine for your specific business what things need to be maintained, because nobody knows your environment better than you. And it's interesting because for Rod and I, we always talk in a lot of generalities. You know, even when Rod's doing demos for customers, I'm sure, Rod, because I've worked in a couple of software companies and other SCs that do the same thing that you do, you're having to be sort of general, especially on something like this, because you don't know the environment that the customer's in. But certainly if he was sitting with one of you guys in the audience, it would be very specific to you. So I hope you can appreciate the fact that it's hard for me to go, just audit this group and then everything's good, because it isn't that simple. So I hope that answers your question.
Alrighty, it is that time to wrap this up. I didn't have time to say it earlier, but you guys will be receiving an email with the recording and the slides shown here today. I'll make sure that that email also includes the link to the previous webinar, auditing webinar that we did with Nick a couple of months ago, so we'll provide that URL to you guys in that follow-up email. It will come from communications@beyondtrust.com, so make sure that that email is whitelisted so you receive the follow-up without any interruption. You'll receive it within 2 business days at the latest. A big thanks again to our speakers, Nick and Rod. You guys, thanks so much. A lot of information in a short amount of time. So thank you guys for getting that all in and for being here today and providing some thought leadership to our audience. We always appreciate you guys. And to everybody who attended live, thanks. And we do appreciate you guys being here with us and all of your questions and interactions. So have a wonderful rest of your day and your week. Take care, everybody. See you at the next one. Bye-bye.